Hi everyone. This is something of a topical bonus lecture for POL 316, the history of Western political thought. As we're about to leave the Greeks and Romans behind for Augustan and Germanic clan and tribal confederations, I thought it'd be worthwhile to take 10 or 15 minutes to talk about something I only briefly touched upon at the time, but which I think is worth spending a bit more time talking about. That is the classical view of slavery in Western political thought. Because the slavery we're all probably most familiar with is the racialized chattel slavery of the American type. And so encountering Aristotle today as undergraduates, young readers are apt to just skim lightly over the few passages Aristotle has about slavery in his Politics, and to read it with our own conceptions of slavery in mind, and to just kind of leave it at that, largely misunderstanding what he was saying and applying present Western moral standards, anachronistically condemning him, most likely. So let's not do that. Let's instead just take a few minutes to understand what Aristotle was saying. Aristotle's views on slavery, presented in his work Politics, are deeply interwoven with his broader philosophical framework, particularly regarding his concepts of virtue, reason, and self-governance. To fully understand Aristotle's stance, it's essential to situate his ideas within his understanding of human nature, politics, and the ultimate purpose of the city-state, or the polis. For Aristotle, political society exists to promote the good life, and the good life is one in which individuals practice virtue, govern their impulses, and live in moderation. Those who cannot do so, according to Aristotle, are unsuited for participation in political life and therefore must be governed by others. This leads him to the conclusion that some individuals are naturally suited to be slaves, not because of external conditions, like birth or race, but because of their inability to exercise the rational self-control necessary to live a fully virtuous life. So in Politics, Aristotle distinguishes between two types of slavery, natural slavery and conventional slavery. Natural slavery is the focus of the discussion, and it's a condition that Aristotle believes is rooted in the very nature of certain individuals. According to Aristotle, some people lack the rational faculties to govern themselves, and are therefore naturally suited to only be governed by others. These individuals, he argues, are akin to living tools, essential for the functioning of the household and the broader political society, but incapable of participating in the deliberative and rational life of the polity. One of the key passages on natural slavery, and again, he doesn't have a lot to say about this, it's fairly briefly, but the first one occurs in Politics 1.5, where he argues, quote, "For that some should be ruled and others be ruled is a thing not only necessary, but expedient. From the hour of their birth, some are marked out for subjugation, others for rule." End quote. Here, Aristotle is asserting that some individuals are naturally predisposed to be ruled. This idea of natural subjugation is not merely about external compulsion or coercion, but about the internal capacities of the individuals themselves. Aristotle's framework is based on his belief that human beings possess different levels of rationality, and those who are deficient in rationality need to be guided by those who possess it more fully. Thus, for Aristotle, natural slavery is a form of benevolent rule over those who cannot fully exercise their own rational faculties. And Aristotle is going to continue, again from 1.5. Quote, "It is clear then that some men are by nature free and others slaves, and that for these latter slavery is both expedient and right." End quote. This passage here suggests that Aristotle saw slavery not only as necessary, but morally justified for certain individuals. The key criterion for distinguishing between natural slaves and free individuals was their capacity for reason. Those who could not reason and govern themselves, those who could reason and govern themselves were suited for freedom and thus political participation, while those who could not were better suited for slavery, as they must be governed by others in order for both themselves and society to flourish. At the heart, then, of Aristotle's justification of slavery is the idea that some individuals possess what could be called the, quote, slavish mentality. This concept, again, refers to a lack of capacity for self-governance, the inability to restrain one's impulses, and a failure to live in accordance with reason and virtue. Aristotle sees self-governance as the highest expression of human freedom, but not everyone is capable of it. Again, from 1.5 of Politics. Quote, "Where then there is such a difference as between body and soul, or between men and animals, as in the case of those whose business is to use their body and who can do nothing better, the lower sort are by nature slaves, and it is better for them, as for all inferiors, that they should be under the rule of a master." End quote. So Here he's making the analogy between the relationship of soul to body and the relationship of ruler to ruled. Just as the soul is meant to govern the body, so too are those with rational capacities meant to govern those who lack them. Those who are incapable of living according to reason, those who act on impulse, desire, or base needs are, in Aristotle's view, akin to the body without the guidance of the soul. In this sense, such individuals need external governance to lead productive and orderly lives. Concretely, for Aristotle then, let's recall the polity, the political society, depended on the ability of its members to live moderately. That is, pursuing virtue, restraining their impulses. And those who could not do so, recall, were a threat to the stability and flourishing of the city-state. If individuals with a slavish mentality were allowed to participate in the political process, so the argument goes, or be left entirely to their own devices, they would contribute to the decay of the social and moral order. As such, their subjugation is seen as a protective measure for the common good. This talk of moderation is, of course, very familiar with you by now because, of course, one of the key ideas in Aristotle's political philosophy that we talked about in week 2 was his notion of the politeia, or constitution. Aristotle believed that the best political structure was one that balanced the various elements of society: rule by the one, monarchy; rule by the few, aristocracy; rule by the many, democracy, to create a stable and just society. And he describes this, if you'll recall, this was from your reading, book 3, 7, quote, "It is evident, therefore, that the best political community is formed by citizens of the middle class, and that those states are likely to be well administered, in which the middle class is large and stronger, if possible, than both the other classes, or at any rate than either singly." End quote. So recall that while Aristotle's preference for a mixed constitution where power was shared among different social groups was an accurate reflection of his belief in moderation and balance, he also acknowledges that different types of constitutions could be legitimate if they served the public good, what Cicero, you'll recall from last week, called the res publica, or the public thing. Monarchy, aristocracy, and democracy could each, in their own ways, serve the public good, provided they were governed by virtuous individuals who acted in the interests of the whole community rather than their own selfish desires. Again, all very familiar from Cicero this past week. For Aristotle, the key question then was whether the rulers, regardless of their form, acted in the interests of the common good. In Politics 3.6, he wrote, quote, "For the real difference between democracy and oligarchy is poverty and wealth. Wherever men rule by reason of their wealth, whether they be few or many, that is an oligarchy, and where the poor rule, that is democracy. But if the rule of the best is oligarchy, it is also aristocracy, and it is not only more just to govern in the interest of all, but unless this is done, the rule is also not lasting." End quote. Aristotle's concern then, as we saw, is with how power is exercised. He argued that a just government, whether it be monarchy, aristocracy, or democracy, must aim at the common good. And it was particularly important in the context of this discussion of slavery, and his discussion of slavery, that those who were enslaved, that is, those with the, quote, slavish mentality, could not be part of the political community because they could not contribute to the common good through rational deliberation and self-governance. Following this, in Politics, books 7 and 8, Aristotle discusses the laws and institutions that were necessary to maintain a just political order. He believed that laws needed to promote virtue and encourage citizens to live in accordance with reason. The role of law, then, is not merely to regulate external behavior, but to cultivate the moral character of its citizens. And we talked about this debate in the early American system in terms of the difference between the democratic impulse and the republican impulse, which was concerned with passing things like sumptuary laws, which is something that Aristotle, of course, was also concerned with. We talked about his concern with excessive wealth being dangerous to the polity. For Aristotle, laws had to be designed to ensure that only those who were capable of rational self-governance participated in political life. This was why he supported the idea of natural slavery. If individuals who could not govern themselves were given political power, they would undermine the common good and threaten the stability of the polis. We talked about this in the context of Plato, Aristotle, and Cicero all, that if, young men who were, profligate with their wealth, spent it all away, that it wasn't wise to entrust them with political power. They could not restrain their own impulses. So, in conclusion, in Aristotle's political philosophy, the concept of natural slavery was deeply tied to his broader ideas about human nature, reason, and virtue. That those who lacked the capacity for rational self-governance, who had a, quote, slavish mentality, had to be governed by others to ensure both their own well-being and the stability of the political community. While Aristotle's views on slavery are obviously troubling to modern sensibilities, they reflect his belief that a just political order depends on the ability of its citizens to live virtuously, to restrain their impulses, and contribute to the common good. For Aristotle, slavery was not merely an economic institution, but a necessary component to a well-ordered society where each individual played the role for which they were best suited. I hope you all found this illuminating, and I look forward to seeing you all Monday. Have a great weekend.